For example, 60% of business owners say they plan to sell their business, but 80% of the businesses that get put up for sale do not find a buyer.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast. Each week we are exploring what it means and what it looks like practically to integrate our Catholic faith into the businesses that we run. Today we've got my friend Zach Scardino from Scardino Partners on to discuss succession planning in family businesses primarily. We also discuss how to increase the value of your business, things to look out for when selling or buying a small business, and how Catholics should approach all of those things kind of as they go through them. Zach is a great person to ask about these things because this is actually what he and his brother Cody do with small businesses all the time. They have helped many business owners go through succession planning, help them structure the sale of their business, and this even includes selling to a family member. So he's got a lot of insight. Being in the line of work that Zach is in, there are some answers that he had to be slightly vague on because he cannot give financial advice. So if you do find this valuable generally, I would encourage you to reach out to him after you listen if you'd like to learn more about what your specific situation is. He has a lot of really, really great advice. He even gave me a bunch right after we got off the call on some of the things I'm working on. And I guarantee you will find it valuable to have that conversation. So definitely encourage you to reach out to him. But I really hope you enjoy this episode after a short disclaimer from Zach.
Nothing I say here today is going to be financial advice. It's all going to be general information, and I hope it'll be helpful. People should consult a financial planner, attorney, or tax professional with their relevant specific questions. For more information on Scardino Strategic Partners and what we do, check out our website at scardinostrategic.com.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast. I'm joined today by Zach. How you doing, Zach?
I'm doing great, Silas. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. I'm going to give everybody just a tiny bit of backstory. So Zach and I worked together with the Knights of Columbus around the same time. It's actually a funny story. My first ever time flying was going out to New Haven for it was like 3 months training or something like that. I forget exactly what it was. And I decided to wear a three-piece suit when I flew. And I still don't regret that decision. It made people walk around me in the airport, but it was a funny time, and that's where we met. And we've been in touch since then. So to maybe set the context for other people listening, the kind of objective of this conversation is to talk all things about family business, succession planning, and then how to sell and buy businesses. Let's kind of just talk about that stuff, right? But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to these days. You know, since we worked together back in the Knights.
Well, I am married to Sarah, and we've got 4 kids together. Since my time working at Knights of Columbus, I started Scardino Strategic Partners with my brother, and our focus is on helping businesses and business owners and people with similar concerns and priorities. It's something that's near and dear to my heart from family experience. A lot of family businesses, they operate in the space, well, the same space we all operate in, really. It's just more perilous for them, where you don't know what you don't know. And so helping them navigate that space and helping them identify some of their blind spots, they can sink a legacy, and they can sink, what you've worked so hard to build for your family. So it's something that's very important to me.
Yeah, no, it clearly has. It's always something you mentioned, and it's not exactly surprising to me that you started this business at some point. So, where are you based again? I don't know if you mentioned that already.
So we're based out of Houston, Texas. We have another office in Beaumont, Texas as well. And then we do work currently in California and Florida, and we'll operate wherever there's a client with a need.
What is it like to work with your brother in a business?
Well, they say that the only ship that's designed to sink is a partnership. So it's something where you go in knowing the challenges, and you know how much humility and give and take is going to be required of you and the other partners. I've seen other partnerships where they fail a year in, or where they fail many years in. Right now, I have the privilege of dealing with business owners who have retired from partnerships years ago, and some of them don't talk to each other today. So I think really it requires patience, compassion, and humility from all parties involved.
Mm-hmm. Is there ever any kind of like specific extra trust you have because it's family? I've heard some people mention this is like, listen, like I knew that no matter what was going to happen with the business, we always had each other's back. Like, have you guys experienced any of that so far?
I think that's definitely a part of it. And the other part that comes with that, I think is hand in hand, is extra transparency.
Hmm. Yeah.
Just complete transparency.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a benefit you can have, right? I think I've heard so many stories of people who knew their business partners very well for a long time before they started a business, and then they started a business and things went really south, not too long after. So I appreciate that. So before we get too far into it, I guess tell me a little bit more about like what role has faith played in your kind of business journey broadly, and any particular stories that you'd like to share.
Well, we know from our experience at Knights of Columbus the story of Father McGivney. He founded Knights of Columbus when he had parishioners who would pass away unexpectedly. And one of the key stories, one of the pivoting points for Father McGivney starting Knights of Columbus was when he had a well-to-do parishioner who owned a business, died, and the business failed, and the mother couldn't provide for herself and her children. In response, Father McGivney started the Knights of Columbus. One of my perspectives was always looking at that story and saying, what if his business didn't have to fail when he died? And I think that's really core to what we're going to talk about today is what is the succession planning? What is the plan that we have in place to make sure that everything you've worked for so hard doesn't die with you or doesn't retire with you?
So let's move into, I guess, let's talk about transition planning. I think how we'll call this, right? And here's a couple just basic stats from my, very limited research before we started here. But there are approximately like 2.3 million small businesses owned by, let's say, aging boomers, if you will, in America. And about 61% of businesses are understood to have zero formal succession planning in place. So that means many, many things, but let's get into it. I guess when you hear these stats, to you as somebody who works with this all the time, what are the first things that come to mind for you?
Well, first, what comes to mind is how broad that statement is and how generous it is, frankly, because it says have no succession planning. It includes, for example, if somebody has a rough guess at the value of their business, that's considered succession planning, and that doesn't factor into that. When we broke it down, we saw this is actually a Mass Mutual Business Owner Perspective study from 2022. It said that 50% of businesses had identified financial needs when it's time to transition. That's a bare minimum. You know what I mean? 34% had a management team. 42% had discussed it with family.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do the math there, you can realize that some of them that have some kind of succession planning have not discussed it with their family at all.
Mm-hmm.
33% have identified actual potential successors. 41% have discussed it with people inside the business. And only 17% have set a timeline for exit. So when you break it down like that, it's not great.
No, it's not. No, it's not great. No, I think it's. I would assume. I would venture to guess that many of the people who say they've discussed it with family, it's not a really serious discussion. It's probably like, hey, I've been thinking about this. What do you think? Wink, wink, and see if anybody is raises their hand to step into the business, which is sadly the case these days. Not many kids want to take over their parents' businesses for probably various reasons. But let's talk about this then. So. We've laid out the stats here. It's pretty damning, if you will. But why do almost all successful businesses die once the founder is ready to retire or the founder passes away?
So the big reason, I mean, you've got genuinely successful businesses that just completely die on the vine, right? And part of it is exactly what we discussed so far. They don't have any plan in place to not die. Mm-hmm. Or the plan that they have in place is not informed by experts in any way, and so they miss massive portions of their plan is just empty space. So, for example, 60% of business owners say they plan to sell their business, but 80% of the businesses that get put up for sale do not find a buyer.
So that again, you said so 60% plan to sell, but 80% of businesses that get put up for sale never get sold?
Never get sold.
Wow. That's a pretty big number.
Right, and the big reason for that, and you can even zoom out and look at succession in general, not just with the sale of the business, not just with passing it on to your kids, is that these business owners have always had the mentality that I have this business for income, what we'll refer to as lifestyle. I have this business to provide for my lifestyle, but they haven't been building the business in any way that consciously builds intrinsic value in the business.
Okay, can you talk a little bit more about what that is?
Sure. So, intrinsic value, if I can simplify it way down, intrinsic value is the difference between somebody starting a business from scratch and somebody having a business where your business is today. That space, that difference in between is intrinsic value, right? So, if I have a business where I'm painting walls, and the only thing I have is an LLC, a bucket, and a paint roller, then the value of my business is the cost of that LLC, my bucket, and my paint roller. So when we talk about building the value of your business, we're building things beyond just the immediate supplies and beyond the immediate necessities of the business into something where somebody says, I don't want to start my own. I want that because it has intrinsic value. It has something that I desire and that I need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess what are some of the core things that people can do to build that, right? So it sounds like part of it is making the business bigger than just one person's, time, because you're still trading time for money in that case. But like, talk about some of the core things that you guys tend to work with your clients and helping them put in place over the time that they're getting ready to sell or transition out.
Well, yeah, a lot of it is changing the way that the business thinks about money, right? The one of the first things that you can do is you can make sure that the business is now looking at maximizing value and building its own valuation. So I liken it to this a lot. Let's say you had a 401k with the company you worked for, and every month you were putting into this 401k. And when you asked them what the value of your 401k was, they would say, I don't know, or, undetermined. And you only found out the value of your 401k, or even if it had a value, on the day you retired. Most people would not be satisfied with that arrangement, but that's what roughly 80% of business owners live in.
Mm-hmm. So it's like the basic problem is like very, very simply they're not even finding a way to genuinely put a good value on the business, and if they do, it's probably substantially off.
Right. So one of the first things that we do with a business is we make the value of the business one of their KPIs.
Mm-hmm.
Most business owners are tracking KPIs like revenue, sales, profitability. One KPI that they're not tracking most of the time, but they should be, is cash flow. But the other one, the huge one, is the value of the business. And I want them to look at it like a ticker symbol. Just like any other stock or account balance or anything like that. I want them to track the value of their business like they would any other asset. So we'll have, an annual internal appraisal of the business for their own purposes. See how the decisions they made over the past year affected the value of their business. How some of their upcoming plans could affect the value of their business. And when they have that kind of KPI, when they're tracking those kinds of factors, they can make decisions that influence it in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. They can see the correlation too between the actions and the increase, right?
Exactly.
So I guess for people who are unfamiliar, there may be some newbies in the business world listening. Can you give some of the very basic things of how you evaluate a business? Obviously, there's different multiples for different types of businesses, but can you just give people the very basic breakdown?
Sure. So first of all, disregard multiples. So that's one that you hear all the time. Somebody will say, oh, a plumbing business or a HVAC business has this multiple. That is such a broad, generalized statement that it's kind of like it's a starting point before you get into the books and the actual value.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a couple different approaches to evaluating a business, and I can't go into great detail on all those in the time that we have, but you've got book value, market value, capitalized earnings value, discounted cash flow, asset accumulation and then just plain liquidation value. The last one being obviously the last one you would ever want to hit.
Yeah,
But
if you have to sell everything at an auction or something.
sometimes it's where you're at, right? But again, broadly speaking, the value of your business is the difference between what somebody would have if they started it from scratch and what they would have if they had your business. You know?
And I guess it also probably depends on the buyer, right? Because some people might have more interest in the specific asset because they know that they can make it more valuable based on their knowledge, right? So it's going to be somewhat determined by the buyer.
It's always about
always
the buyer.
determined by the buyer.
Yeah. You know, this is something that's funny. I have people that, and by the way, this is not a complaint. I love these reach outs, but I get messages periodically from people on LinkedIn that say, hey, Zach, if you have any clients in the long-term care space or in the consumer residential services space or this or that are looking to exit their business, please let me know. I get those messages periodically, and that immediately lets me know, one, they're reaching out to me because they know that anybody I bring them is going to have their finances well adjusted and well taken care of. But they're also reaching out to me because they are an ideal and interested buyer in that segment, motivated buyer.
So just to kind of recap, your point is broadly speaking, most business owners do not have a plan, and like the first point of planning any of this is being able to determine your valuation of your business by tracking certain metrics and making sure that you do the things that increase the valuation of that business.
Right.
Okay, got it. Anything else in this area that you want to talk about before we kind of move on a little bit?
Yeah, one of my favorite analogies that has come up recently is that in baseball they started allowing people to challenge pitch calls. And I think this was just in spring training, but they're just kind of piloting this, right? And the one thing they found was that pitchers were the absolute worst judges of what was a ball or a strike.
Yeah.
I mean, it got to such the point that teams were banning their pitchers from challenging calls. Some of these pitchers had as high as a 90% failure rate on challenges. Business owners are not so different. When business owners evaluate their business, they have as much as a 60% standard deviation.
Wow.
So if they valued their business at $100,000, for example, it might be worth $400,000 or it might be worth $1.6 million. It's almost no correlation between what business owners value their business as the actual value.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so it's just important to bring in other people to help with these things, right?
Right.
I guess aside from tracking and understanding the valuation of the business and these basic metrics, are there other kind of core things that will lead to a much better transition process or being, a higher likelihood of being able to sell your business?
Yes. There's a couple different things that you can step back and look at on a macro scale. Making sure your business is structured correctly can make the acquisition or transition process much easier. Another thing is making sure that there's not going to be a high turnover of employees. This can involve, retirement plans are extremely easy to set up nowadays. They can be almost no cost, very inexpensive to almost no cost to set up. So these are the kinds of things where you can build employee loyalty in the lead up to a succession or the sale or acquisition of a business.
Mm-hmm. So basically you're saying that's like a core benefit that they would get elsewhere. That's like a core reason they might leave. What about beyond employee loyalty and lack of turnover? Any other like core principles you typically try to bring people?
Tax benefits, where we look at making sure that we're paying as little taxes as possible in most cases. Also making sure that this would sound very simple, but making sure that your bookkeeping is meeting generally accepted accounting practices.
I mean, it does sound silly, but there's a lot of people who don't do that, right? They treat their business as a personal bank account, is what I've heard pretty often.
Most.
Yeah. So I guess for somebody who might be unfamiliar, like you mentioned earlier, the structure of the business. Is it best to just keep it as an LLC? Do you want to transition to an S corp at some point? And then on the bookkeeping, are there any basic things you can share? I know that some of these things you should definitely talk to an accountant about, but like any core simple things that you would just point out to people.
Yeah. So the structure of a business is really going to depend on what business interests you have. It's going to depend on what type of business it is and what your succession planning ultimately is. And it's something where, in most cases, you are able to adjust that planning as your plans may change over time. But you can have anything from a C corp with multiple S corps or LLCs beneath it, to just a sole proprietorship. But it really just depends on the type of your business that you're in. It's hard to give a blanket answer to that. Again, it's best to bring in a professional, at least to look at that.
Yeah.
You're set up in the best way possible.
Yeah, one thing I have seen as relatively common is because business owners are used to kind of treating their business as their bank account, is if you are planning to sell, make sure you stop doing the the tax maximization route and start doing the cash flow optimization route if you want to get a better sale price, right? Because otherwise people are going to say this does not make any sense. I'm not paying like much more than a penny for this.
Yeah.
So okay, before we go, I eventually want to break down some of the advice around. We'll talk about buying businesses because a lot of people in our community are interested in purchasing businesses. But let's focus still on the owner side. So if you're selling your business, let's say the ideal scenario here is you're looking to transition this down to one of your kids or to your nephew or something, right? Can you just walk us through what this kind of should look like in an ideal world, and then some of the pitfalls that people tend to run into? Because I think this is a core thing that many Catholic entrepreneurs would want, is to be able to pass it down, assuming their kids are interested. And how do they go about that? Like some of the core kind of pieces of advice you'd offer.
Yeah. So this is where some of the guidance and some of the information I've provided already becomes more important. I wouldn't even say that it's much different. It just becomes so much more critically important. If you want your kids to inherit your business, if you want your kids to receive your business, it is crucial that you focus on building value in this business. They need to have something to inherit. They need to have something to receive. The other thing that I would stress is that in many situations, it should be treated as much as possible like a sale to the successors, so that you, the owner, are still taken care of. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that without saddling a financial burden on the successor or on your kids, while still being taken care of in your retirement.
So when you're watching, or when you're in the process of helping advise somebody to transition the business down to a relative, probably a child usually, like what are some of the things that you would say tend to go wrong on the interpersonal side that you would say keep an eye out for these things?
That's a great question. Okay, all right, I'm a nerd, so I'm really excited by this question. So some of the big things that we see go wrong was there wasn't enough pre-planning, obviously, in place. Cash flows weren't right. Maybe there wasn't enough transparency in what was going on in the business. And by transparency, I don't necessarily mean honesty. I mean that there might be details that the business owner didn't think of sharing prior to the transition of the business. Because keep in mind, this business owner has just been operating it in the day-to-day. There's a lot of things that they know, that they're aware of, and that they take for granted. A new person, even if it's a person who's been working in the business, a new person taking over the business functions and the administration of the business may not know those things. They may not be aware of those things, and they certainly aren't taking them for granted. So one thing that's very helpful in that kind of situation is having an outside third party who is also knowledgeable enough to look for the things where the business owner or the person taking over might not know that they don't know. That outside person isn't taking anything for granted, and they're knowledgeable enough to look in all the cracks and corners.
Yeah. Is it pretty common when a transition happens for there to be like, let's call it a bit of a slump, where it's like it oftentimes takes some time for the new owner to kind of really figure out how things are working? So like you shouldn't expect that if you were growing 25% a year and that you're just going to keep growing that. Is there typically like this transition period where the seller will stay on as an advisor or still work there fully until they kind of figure it out?
Well, let's first of all get out of the way. There is absolutely more than a slump. I think the figure is, and I'd have to find my citation for this, but I think the figure is that 80% of businesses, or around that number, that do have a successor die.
Mm.
So, at a bare minimum, the majority of businesses that do have a successor, they die right around that point. It is, without the proper planning in place, it is the death knell to a business.
Interesting.
So, some of the things that can be done to prevent that, to circle back to your last very good question and give a more thorough answer to that, is we can work on shoring up assets. We can work on minimizing our liabilities. We can work on improving cash flow, and also making sure that there aren't any tax surprises coming up. Those are another one that comes up often. Making sure that the succession plan that's in place has not put an unreasonable personal or business financial burden on the new owner.
Interesting. Okay, that's really helpful. I appreciate that. Let's talk about now buying businesses. So let's shift the conversation a bit. If you're, somebody who's, you've got some money saved up and you're going to go do an SBA loan or something, you're going to go buy a business. What are the core things for people to keep in mind when doing this? I'm assuming it's partially just like mirror image of what you talked about. But if you were going out to buy, let's say like a laundromat or some kind of like gas station business or something today, something sweaty, what are the things to look at?
So it is in vogue right now to look for the boring businesses out there. And I say that all respectfully. I love boring businesses. The things that are not, glitzy and get a lot of attention. So when you're looking for these businesses, some of the main thing to look at is cash flow. You're going to want to go through at least a few years of their finances, and you're going to want to be able to look for those little red flags that might indicate that what you're seeing in their finances is not what's out there in reality. So one thing that's very common is when you're evaluating these businesses is that what you're seeing on paper is not the full story. So you want to make sure that you or the experts that you're retaining are able to find and identify those red flags or just indicators that there's more to the story than what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing to keep in mind is we've already seen the numbers in terms of baby boomers retiring. The fact that matter that the majority of these businesses, the last thing they're going to do as a business owner is flip that sign from open to closed, and that's it, and just not unlock the next day. So the reality is that you as a buyer out in this market, you have to provide something better than that outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean to diminish that too much, because I think that as Catholic Christians, we have a responsibility to treat somebody better than that. But the reality is that you have so many options out there that you should not feel like any one individual business is the opportunity, is the business for you to acquire. I haven't crunched the numbers on how many laundromats there are out there, how many dry cleaners, how many car washes, how many residential services businesses there are out there, but there's a lot, and there's a huge number of them that are retiring in the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a lot of options, and you should be willing to move on from a deal to look at your other options if something doesn't look right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in other words, don't just think that this is the golden goose that you got to get. Right. There's plenty of things. I think this is going to be a challenge. I mean, I would especially encourage people this is going to be the first time buying a business to really think this way, because if you do not, you're going to fall into the trap that so many people fall into. It's like, this is an investment of a lifetime. I got to get in. I got to get in now because I'm not going to. Like that's what salespeople do to you, and that's what you're going to fall for, right? So do not get it, because there's going to be more deals. So don't fall for that first one, right?
Love blinds us. So if you fall in love with a business, you one thing that I've seen before is I've had people bring me in very late in the stage
Mm-hmm.
of the acquisition process where they're like, Zach, I'm ready to close this, acquisition. I just want you to look at it before I do it. And I look at this and I say, man, this is a distressed company. And they say, what? What are you talking about? I said, this is this company has got some pretty serious challenges. It projects to be cash flow negative in the next 18 months. You start running some of these models and you say, hey, this is what you're acquiring. I'm not saying don't acquire it. I'm just saying be aware of what you're acquiring. And the you know business buyer says, okay, this changes my math a lot on what I should be paying
Offering.
for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this brings the question that if there's a lot of these businesses that are A, poorly run, and B, like there's a heavy motivation to move on because they're retiring, but we as Catholics want to treat people respectfully, and there's plenty of options for us, right? If we're buying these businesses, how should we approach this, right? Like how can we find a way to ensure that the person is receives a fair price for it, that we carry on their legacy to whatever extent they're hoping for that, and that of course the employees are also well taken care of, right? Because we wouldn't want to see the livelihoods of all of the employees just go to nothing. So are there core things that you tend to kind of think about as principles while you're advising people?
Yeah, I think you can satisfy both of those needs and those priorities where you say, I want to make sure that this business owner is taken care of. And I would even step back and say, not necessarily poorly run, but run with different priorities. But if you've got some of these businesses where they've got good cash flow, but they don't necessarily have high intrinsic value, to me, that's possibly a sweet spot where they don't have a ton of assets, they don't have a cash heavy, asset book. I start looking at this and I say, what can I do for this business owner that most people might not do? You can I look at three different ways to acquire that business. It could be a business or owner financed deal where there's a debt on the books that you're paying off to the business owner over a period of time or indefinitely or whatever your arrangement is with that business owner. It could be a gradual distribution of equity, which there's a benefit there to what you're talking about. In a gradual distribution of equity, the business owner starts out with most of the ownership in the business and also a vested interest in seeing the business succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't necessarily need to be actively involved in the day-to-day, but they are certainly going to want to be cooperative in the business continuing to succeed, right?
Because their distributions would also be better basically over time if the business keeps raising, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. So, and then the last one would be a profit sharing plan. And profit sharing plans can be, over a fixed period of time. They can be indefinite. I've seen business owners that I've worked with come out of a sale or transition of a business with far more favorable net and gross outcomes based on a profit sharing plan than many other arrangements. And especially in some of these businesses where you look at it and you say, I can build the value and the profitability of this business by making some of these changes, that maybe somebody who is in the business for 15 or 20 years or 30 years or even longer than that, maybe that just wasn't their interest. Their interest was continuing to provide their income, continuing to provide their lifestyle, and growing the business wasn't their priority. Obviously, if you're taking over a business, your main priority is building it to be more than what you acquired, right?
Yeah.
So that profit sharing plan could be very attractive to a retiring business owner, especially when the cash buyout for a business would be so low. And again, that cash buyout usually has, well, I don't want to say usually, but often has negative tax consequences.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, you don't want to give it all Uncle Sam. Even if you live in Texas, it's still gonna hit, it's still gonna hurt.
Yeah, so in that sense, those serve the relinquishing business owner, the selling business owner, very well. It takes better care of them potentially than what some of the other arrangements would be, and it serves you in making sure that you are providing a value to them that has some kind of correlation to the value that it's bringing to you.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it just all comes down to charity, right? Like you view the person, regardless if they're a family member or not, right? You view this person as a human who is created in the image of God, and you should treat them with respect and not try to get one over on them, right? If it feels
Yep.
like you're getting too much of a good deal, maybe reevaluate the deal. Maybe there's something else you're missing, but maybe you should be a little bit more generous. And I think that this idea of generosity is something that's very difficult for many business people to think about because they're so used to just focusing on profits, right? And it's not that focusing on profits is greedy, but it oftentimes leads to greed, right? And you kind of have to separate the two of these things, right? That's how I think about it. Um, are there any specific? I don't know if you can share examples or not, but maybe just general principles on if somebody wants to have part of the business be or the proceeds of the sale, I guess if you will, go to charity, like certain ways that people have done this really well to like donate money to the church or to certain causes.
That is getting into a financial planning situation that can be very detailed and unique to the
Hmm.
individual and their broader financial circumstances. There are things that you can do in terms of charitable trusts, donor advised funds. I've worked with these in the past, and so I'm scrolling through my head and trying to think of ways to explain some of these without
Yeah, without the
you know
financial advice.
getting too specific. But there are, I would say, there's many different ways to accomplish that, and the one of the first things that I would do is I would start that dialogue with the charity.
Hmm.
If there's a specific charity that you have in mind, start that dialogue with the charity because some charities have different um, uh, line items in their bylaws or in
Mm.
their charter that say that they can accept contributions in this way or that way. So, for example, if you let's just make up a hypothetical where you said that you left a 10% equity in your business to the charity of your choice.
Hmm.
And your intention was that they would continue to profit from that and receive some kind of, you know, benefit long term from that. But the charity's charter said that they had to immediately liquidate any. You could
Yeah,
see
yeah, yeah.
where somebody should have had a conversation
Yep.
before that took place. So that's one of those things. Again, we get into you don't know what you don't know.
Hmm.
Most business owners would not think that that's a major thing that needs to sit down and maybe even periodically every couple of years
Hmm.
just touch base with that charity again and say, hey, in the past we had this arrangement set up. I just want to make sure that's still good on you
Yeah.
guys' part. So understanding some of the different instruments that can be used to accomplish that. Sometimes the charity might have the ability to take on equity in some ways that you might not expect,
Hmm.
depending on how sophisticated the charity is and everything like that.
Hmm.
So I would make sure that, obviously, in my extraordinarily biased perspective, make sure you have a financial planner involved in that, and also have an open dialogue with the charity.
I'm kind of curious if there's any things like you may not have seen this, but I always wonder if there's ways that people like outside of like the finance stuff that they can do things when they sell their business to kind of like I always give this idea of like kind of dropping Catholic seeds around. Like, what if you sold your business and you made a big announcement on St. Joseph's feast day and you have a plane fly over and drop St. Joseph cards all over the city? Like, obviously you're gonna get fined for that, but it'd be kind of cool, right? Like if you could do stuff that's more of like on the media side to just bring glory to God in some ways. And I hope we get some creative people dropping in and letting me know their thoughts on how to do this because I would love to see more of these levers, right, being pulled for bringing the culture back to God. This has been very helpful so far. Let's talk a little bit about for if somebody is in a situation where they're listening and they're looking to sell or they probably more in the case of the people listening to this show, their family or their dad or somebody or their grandpa is looking to sell their business. When should they probably like get advice from somebody like you on this process?
So, if I'm the business owner and I've got a business that is generating revenue and I would say generating enough income from this business to live off of, that's a good time for me to start getting some planning help from it because it's gotten past a hope what I hope to be a business and it has gotten to be it's a full blown business at this point. So at a minimum, I would say on that side, if you are somebody who is anticipating inheriting a business, there's a couple different directions you could go. You could be looking to bring in a planner like me at any point to advise the business on how to start working to make the business something that is desirable to inherit, first of all, desirable to receive, and is set up to make that succession successfully. It's hard to say, the best time to get somebody like me involved in that is, whatever time this is getting published. So,
Right away.
and then the next best time is, right now. So you could have that planner represent you and serve as a fiduciary to you, or you could have that planner working for the business and serving as a fiduciary to the business. You can even have co-clients in that kind of situation.
Is it allowed for, let's say, a father and son both to, like, for you for them to make an agreement where say, listen, your job is to help get that kind of the most equitable deal for both of us, even though we, technically speaking, you could say have competing interests?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And all that it really requires is that the person hiring the planner expresses, this is what I want. I want you, because our job as fiduciaries is to meet their best interest. And if their interest is to make sure that their child or their successor of whatever kind is inheriting the business on a favorable terms, we work to that outcome. In fact, another thing, I've had businesses where they said, the business owner didn't feel like he was going to get a good buyout offer elsewhere. He ended up selling the business to a manager of his business who is able to move from manager to eventual owner of the business. So one of his large priorities was making sure that incoming owner was going to be well taken care of and making sure that he was provided for in retirement. So yeah, we met both of those needs in that kind of situation.
Have you seen any unique situations with employee involvement, like trying to ensure that, like, say you've got a really profitable business that's spinning off cash, that the business owner is like, it's not usual for employees to be paid very highly, but what they do is they like make like a profit sharing, or I don't know if they would go the ESOP route, but like, have you ever seen any interesting ways that they're trying to make sure that their employees are super loyal because they've got extra income?
Yeah, in fact, there's a lot of tax favorable ways to do this, rather than just going through payroll. There's a number of different benefits that you can use. If it's a key employee, there might be some kind of golden handcuff situations where you have that conversation with them. They say, look, we're going to be implementing a succession plan in the business. You're important to this business, and we want to make sure that you stay around. We'd like to set you up with this benefit. There's other situations where you can have a more soft, delicate touch. One of my favorite things to do is some of these benefits that are very inexpensive for businesses to provide, like retirement plans, or maybe just beefing up an existing retirement plan. Some of these, optional benefits, all these different things. Announce that in conjunction with the business succession announcement, right? So, you tell your employees, my son's going to be taking over the business, and everybody now has access to a retirement plan. My son's going to be taking over the business, and one of his first decisions was that he wanted everyone to receive this additional benefit. People tend to receive that news pretty well.
Yeah, so there's also the marketing spin, right? Like this is something people severely underrate, is that when there are big moments, it's oftentimes, if you're not media trained, you're just going to like let the reaction happen versus kind of creating it. And I know, there's negative connotations with that, but at the end of the day, like humans tend towards, having some of these pessimistic outlooks when you can actually just kind of promote it in the right direction. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just helps people see the benefits, right? Like just like, Catholics, we are not all about getting rid of all of our pain, and that's a perspective the world wouldn't have. But because of the way we look at it, we perceive it differently, right? So if we can work on that, that's a really interesting point. Actually, I think that's definitely a golden nugget. We gotta make sure I highlight afterwards. In going through this, like when you work with people, what are there any core like big blow up reasons why a deal doesn't get done between, especially between family members? I'm really curious about the family side of things, as you can see.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing that I see in some of these agreements blowing up is, regardless of whether it's family or a third party or anything like that, the biggest thing that I see is a misalignment of expectations or priorities. Uh, I've seen on the family side, what typically happens that kills this is the conversation happening way too late.
Hmm.
So, and a lot of times it's because of fear. You know, we're nervous about having that conversation, or we're afraid how the other party's going to react. It's a lot easier to have that conversation now than it is later. So, and it's a lot easier to make sure priorities are aligned. You've got more time to make adjustments. You've got more time to alter, adjust our plans. And yeah, it is really the same whether you're talking third party or family. Making sure that priorities are aligned and making sure that clear expectations are set.
Hmm.
Because another thing that will happen that I've seen happen before when there wasn't, any kind of expert guidance involved, is that after the succession took place, people realized that certain I's that weren't dotted or certain T's that weren't crossed, I's that they didn't know existed, T's
Hmm.
that they didn't know existed. Those things came up, and quickly you started to realize that there were presumptions on one side or the other that weren't being fulfilled.
Hmm.
There were priorities on one side or the other that weren't being met, and that there were expectations that weren't mutual in that process. And again, it's usually not because somebody was malicious or somebody had bad intentions. It's just because, when you're a business owner or when you're receiving a business, you live in that space of you don't know what you don't know.
Hmm.
And so it's hard to foresee something when you've
Yeah,
not
I
been
can
there.
imagine that there's probably plenty of situations that even you've seen just in the work you do, that again something was not intentionally not disclosed, but it wasn't, and then it causes big strife between the personal family relationships because they assume it was done intentionally or whatnot. And this is probably where it becomes very important to put on your do I really trust this person? Like, do I know that they would do the right thing, kind of thing, right? And then once you know that, it kind of makes a lot of the points mute, right? You don't have to really worry about them because you know that, hey, it was just a mistake, unless there's other reasons to believe otherwise. But I do like this topic because I personally believe that if you do it properly, having a family business where many members of the family are involved, especially if you are Catholic, right? You should be pursuing the virtues and you should understand charity and forgiveness and all these things. You should actually be able to come much closer together as a family through running the business because your kind of weak points will be exposed and you'll be able to learn how to become stronger and to like focus on what areas to develop, etc. And I think that if you can learn how to kind of wear these different hats, it creates a much more robust and dynamic family situation than if you're just everybody's working their own jobs in some corporate setting. Any final things that you would just bring up to people who are considering starting a business or just other Catholics in the entrepreneur space that you would just exhort them, like what should they be thinking about and doing as a Catholic in the business world?
I would just say that there's a ton of opportunity out there. There's a great deal of need out there. There's a lot of business owners out there that frankly need you to come to them and present an option, any option for succession. And that one of the things that you can do, and I don't mean to be too grandiose about this, but literally as a societal good, is offer an avenue for somebody to take over this business. Because there are people who depend on these businesses that are just going to close their doors. There are employees who have their jobs there. There are customers that relied on it. There's a sandwich shop next door that gets its daytime traffic from having them as a neighbor. These businesses, it is in the best interest of the business owner, the employees, the stakeholders, society as a whole, for you to take over these businesses. And if you can do so in a way that's mutually beneficial, it is an intrinsic good. Uh, and and again, I don't want to sound too sappy about this, but this is, to me, this is a moral and a in the sense of the word that we're most familiar with, a charitable thing to do, to approach these business owners and say, I have an avenue for this business to continue, that everything that you've worked for to continue after you retire or after you're gone. So
Yeah, I mean, to me, like I'll just echo that because one of my biggest, I don't know if you say fears, but I guess you could say fears about the future is that in 100 years, the same companies that run the world that are these huge massive corporations are going to continue running everything. Like, I do not want to see Blackstone come and buy up, all of these small, businesses all around America because that is just going to concentrate the wealth in hands of people who I don't think increasingly do not have the interest of the family unit in mind. And everybody is seen as a number. So I think that if you're somebody listening who has a relative looking to get rid of their business or to sell at some point, consider the call that God might be giving to you. I think you can never do this unless you first develop a habit of listening, because there's always God doesn't usually slap us in the face with these things. He's usually kind of tugging at us gently and waiting for us to answer the call. So if this is you and you feel this natural kind of inclination, be willing to spend some time in adoration thinking about this and considering it, because a lot of people are afraid to start businesses. They think entrepreneurship is dangerous, yada yada yada. They consider job security, which I think is a big a big hoax. But just think about what God is asking you, right? God will take care of you. We know that He says, do not worry. Just be like the lilies of the field. They don't toil, but He takes care of them, right? Even if they throw it in the fire, they're still fine with it, right? That's one of my favorite passages. But just consider this and take what Zach's saying to heart, that you have a moral responsibility, and it's out of charity that you should consider doing these things. So any last, I guess, calls to action or where people can reach you, Zach? Because I'm assuming there's a number of people who could definitely benefit from your services.
yeah. So one passing comment first is that when I'm looking at succession planning or when I'm looking at scaling, there are private equity firms and there are investment banks that we might even utilize their services in taking care of our clients. So many of these have morals and ethics that will align with you and what you're trying to accomplish. So we know from the book of Judges that sometimes help can come from unexpected places. I would say don't rule out some of these options, especially if you're working with a planner who knows and understands your priorities and says, hey, these people are going to be helpful in helping us see your plan through to fruition. But just closing out, I would say that I've provided a lot of general information here. I haven't provided a lot of super specific individualized advice. I haven't provided any financial advice. So if people are looking for something that's more specifically speaking to their individual situation or their business, they could seek us out at scardinostrategic.com and submit a contact request there, or just read up about us and learn what we're about.
Yeah, and reach out to me if anybody is in this situation. There's a lot of people who are looking to buy businesses or considering selling, and if it's a good fit, I'll definitely link you guys directly to Zach. He'll take my emails, okay? Don't worry about it. All right, very good. Well, this has been a pleasure having you on, man. I really appreciate you doing this, and I'm excited to see the value people get out of this, and see how you guys continue to grow and help other business owners with their succession planning. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in today. If you found this valuable and have more questions, we encourage you to reach out to Zach directly for advice on your situation. Again, I do ensure that you will find value out of the call, so I highly recommend reaching out to him. His information can be found in the show notes. If you like what we're doing, show us a little love and share what we're doing on social media, or share it directly by texting or emailing some of your friends who you think will find it valuable. And finally, if you are a Catholic entrepreneur, consider becoming a paid member of what we're doing. It's $10 a month or $100 a year, and you will get access to all paid content. You can also join, and this is the most important part, you can join our peer group of Catholic founders who are constantly, giving each other advice, periodically having chats to help each other kind of through our journeys. And, just sort through the things that we go through as we kind of navigate this entire world of, genuinely applying our faith to our businesses. So all you have to do to become a paid member is go to catholicfounders.com/subscribe and pick the tier that you prefer. And we will see you next time. Thank you. God bless.